Hello, comrades.
Hold on! I got a thing with a chair!
Hello, Bay Area 415.
I should really do a Marxist analysis on BoJack Horseman.
Slap my salami. The guy's a commie.
How's it going, comrades? This is Bay Area 415, and I know we said that we were going to do a DPRK or a North Korean reaction video today. However, one of the videos that I would really like to review does not have any subtitles, and I was wondering if I can pitch it out to all of you to help me translate this. By the way, I know a lot of people have asked me to do subtitles myself, and this is highly ironic and hypocritical. However, it's really time-consuming on our end, and we're really trying to figure out some type of way to streamline subtitles in our videos, so stay tuned for that. In related news, I also did a poll on what you all wanted to see in our next reaction video, and it was actually close between Cuban reaction videos and the Hong Kong protests. Seeing now that I had to delay the DPRK video, I went ahead and did the Hong Kong protest video this week, but we'll have the DPRK video up next and then Cuba. Now, with all that said, the Hong Kong protests are a subject that is really near and dear to me, not because I support them, but because they actually helped me study and understand China as a whole. So, thanks to the protesters for turning me into one of the biggest supporters of China out there. I don't know how many posts or articles I created on this subject, to their capitalistic woes, from Hong Kong's history, their national security law, one country, two system policy, extradition bill, the works. So with that said, I found an excellent report from RT by Michelle Greenstein that basically covers everything about these Hong Kong protests extremely well. So I am just going to review this video and sprinkle in my commentary and see what kind of information we can extract from there. So let's get into it and see what we can interpret from these protests.
When he learns she slept with another man, he strangles her to death, stuffs her in a suitcase, and dumps it in some bushes. But because Hong Kong doesn't have an extradition agreement with Taiwan, he remains free. This is the case that the Hong Kong government cites when proposing the infamous extradition bill. What the bill would do is allow Hong Kong to surrender fugitives like Chang Tong-kai on a case-by-case basis to any territory with which the region doesn't already have an extradition treaty. Opposition politicians immediately claimed that Beijing would use this bill to jail political dissidents.
So Michelle is exactly on point when she talks about the murder of a pregnant woman. In fact, when the bill was withdrawn, guess what happened to this guy? He walked away scot-free. They were trying to catch murderers who killed pregnant women with this bill, not political opposition. But it's quite ironic looking back at all this, that the oppositional leaders feared that China would use this bill to quiet political dissidents when this national security bill, which was caused by these riots, backfired on these protesters completely. I mean, just imagine if they just passed the bill. There wouldn't even be this national security bill in the first place, but here we are. Also, isn't an extradition treaty something you do when you're trying to respect the sovereignty of another country or another society? So this actually bolsters Hong Kong's sovereignty status, not weaken it. This bill actually ran through the gamut as well, as all the financial crimes were stricken from the bill. This article does a fantastic job on listing what exact crimes were and were not extraditable, and you can plainly see that political dissent is not one of them. But no, the bill was tabled indefinitely, and that should have been that, right? Well...
But the protests continued and escalated. Unsatisfied protesters created a list of 5 demands: the full official withdrawal of the extradition bill, for the government to stop designating the protesters as rioters, unconditional amnesty for everyone arrested and jailed so far, for the government to start an independent investigation into police brutality outside its existing complaints council, and for immediate universal suffrage.
I hope you all noticed that their platform has no mention of independence or freedom within all this whatsoever. And that's for obvious reasons. Not only do the majority of citizens in Hong Kong do not want independence from China, but their entire economy relies on China as well. 55% of Hong Kong's trade and 80% of its tourists are from mainland China. Hong Kong does not pay any taxes to China and enjoys a capitalist system on top of the millions that are suffering under it.
By the 1830s, British and American entrepreneurs were getting rich selling opium to these Chinese addicts. And when the Chinese government ordered them to stop, the British invaded, sending gunboats to Chinese ports and blockading the Pearl River. And once China was defeated militarily, China was forced to sign this treaty, and after it took the island, it used this perfect port city to ship drugs more efficiently.
Hong Kong was built on stolen land from the Opium Wars, and it was a demand under the name of free trade to sell opium.
So this history is extremely important because when you see Hong Kong protesters wave the British and colonial flags, it's almost offensive to see that what they want is imperialist back ruling over their lands with segregation, apartheid, brutal repression on Chinese citizens, and whatnot. There's an excellent CGTN video that states how Hong Kong has a rich 2,000-year history with China until the British came in and stole their lands through their guns and looting because they wanted to sell opiate to their people. And from there, the UK's oppressive rule continued through not only selling opium, but sexual slavery, racism, and a whole lot worse. There's actually a great law article that listed all these horrible and humiliating oppressive laws written by Professor Richard Klein, which I'll link in the description below. Also, Michael Parenti actually made a speech about the effects of opium that inflicted the Chinese population right before the revolution.
Henry Rosemont, he notes that when the communists liberated Shanghai from the US-sponsored Kuomintang reactionary government in 1949, the communists found that about 20% of the population in Shanghai, 1.2 million people, were drug addicts. And every morning, special crews of street cleaners, quote, would gather up the corpses of children and adults who had been murdered during the night or died of disease, cold, and starvation. Ladies and gentlemen, I say it without flinching, communism in Eastern Europe, Russia, China, Mongolia, North Korea, and Cuba brought land reform and human services, a dramatic bettering of the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people on a scale never before or never since witnessed in human history.
I absolutely love that speech. If you can watch that speech, it's only about 3 minutes. It will be worth it. Additionally, isn't it funny that the British forced China to continue buying opium through Hong Kong for the sake of free trade? But now the West is banning Chinese corporations left and right through their own laws and regulation. Like, for example, TikTok, free trade for white Western hegemonic powers. Moving on.
In 1984, the Chinese and the British signed a joint declaration stating that China would resume its sovereignty over Hong Kong on July 1st, 1997, and that Hong Kong would exist under a policy called One Country, Two Systems.
This was the most troublesome aspect for me with the one country, two policy systems. Decolonization basically was obstructed because of this treaty. Within the first section of the joint declaration, China must, quote, enact and promulgate Hong Kong to be a special administrative region where it enjoys independent finances and is not taxed by the Chinese government. In the very same section, the declaration prohibits socialism. I kid you not. They literally say prohibit socialism and forces Hong Kong to keep practicing its capitalist system along with maintaining free trade ports and its lifestyle. It instills a Western-style democracy, elections, and governmental branches instead of democratic centralism. On top of nationalistic issues, the declaration continues to promote English despite over half the population being ethnically Han Chinese and keeps its own regional flag. If we observe Marxist theorist Frantz Fanon, you can already see why Hong Kong still has troubles integrating back to China as it historically has always been. In his most popular book, The Wretched of the Earth, Fanon wrote extensively on the need to not only overthrow such colonial oppression through revolutionary means, but also save a national identity through violent struggle. Liberation from colonial powers were only a facade to continue their exploitation through neocolonialism. As Fanon called for a complete decolonization. He also demanded that the West provide reparations for all the exploited countries to regain and develop their own economic prowess and national dignity. He says, quote, "Imperialism leaves behind germs of rot, which must be clinically detected and removed not only from our land, but our minds as well." This is a very, very relevant quote to what we're seeing with these protesters who wave imperialist flags and plead for the UK to come back and save them. Also, interference from the UK to offer them amnesty and citizenship is just another form of neo-colonial influence to exert in this region as well, as the British are not ashamed to continue their exploitation.
Although Hong Kong is known internationally as being very wealthy and prosperous, that's not the case for all its residents. Over 1.3 million people live under the poverty line here. Over 250,000 people live in what Soko calls inadequate housing. And over 40% of Hong Kong residents live in either public housing or subsidized housing.
The price of housing going up very fast. That means the rich people get more and more. The distribution of resources is unfair. So the young people angry about this. This is the fundamental problem. This is the root problem.
It's the capitalists of Hong Kong that abused the capitalist system that was set by the Joint Declaration to prevent any and all socialist systems from being used in Hong Kong. Their inequality is no joke. However, I find it stunning that they could still blame China for their economic woes when China has been lifting people out of poverty left and right through job allocation programs, free housing, alleviation commissions, and other wealth distribution programs that made China the economic powerhouse it is today. Hong Kong needs to focus on the capitalist system that put them in this position, not China, which completely respects its independence through this joint declaration.
Although there seems to have been a conscious choice to brand this surge of protests as a leaderless movement, individuals, political parties, and organizations are giving this movement its direction. And U.S. officials and organizations are openly colluding with this opposition.
Okay, these connections are extremely important, as these Hong Kong leaders are obviously pulling the strings and influencing protesters. You have millions of dollars being pumped into these organizations, and these Hong Kong leaders meeting with American Congress people from Marco Rubio to Nancy Pelosi. American-sponsored NGOs are literally running these protests, teaching them how to make weapons, protect themselves, and other things that the police will probably raid in this country. We also have State Department officials getting caught with these protesters and ordering them around to direct the flow of the protests. It cannot be more obvious how America is intervening with these protests and influencing them to continue. These interviews say it best here.
The National Endowment for Democracy takes U.S. taxpayer money. It literally funds foreign political parties. It gives training to people who end up, going on violent rampages through the country. It literally funds the salaries of foreign politicians. It brings them over to meet with Mike Pompeo. The National Endowment for Democracy, they're completely and fully responsible for keeping these protests alive and keeping the lifeblood of money flowing through countries that the U.S. wants to overthrow.
This next speaker brings an incredibly important point about the United States' hypocrisy for supporting freedom for these Hong Kong protesters while shunning the Black Lives Matter protesters.
It's quite curious that Senator Ted Cruz of Texas has joined the protesters in Hong Kong. And what's even more curious is that in Mr. Cruz's own Texas, you've had police shoot black citizens in their homes, and yet we have not seen Senator Cruz join the massive protests against police misconduct against citizens that he's sworn to represent.
I think it's incredible that we can look at the Hong Kong protest where there were zero deaths by the hands of the Hong Kong police, whereas we are having protest for the genocide of black people from the very same authorities. Mind you, Hong Kong protesters actually block BLM support and protest while supporting Trump's agenda as their agenda are well known for racist attack on Chinese mainlanders, racist attack on African Americans, and support from far-right organizations, including Ukrainian Nazis. I'm kidding you not, Ukrainian Nazis. BLM is far more important than what these phony protests from Hong Kong are fighting. But where do our American tax dollars go? The CPC not only supports BLM, as stated in this video here.
Black lives matter. Their human rights need to be guaranteed. Racial discrimination against minorities is chronic sickness in American society.
But they also have a rich history of supporting these movements, especially when they invited Huey Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, to China. Huey actually wrote, "As we crossed into China, the border guards held their automatic rifles in the air as a signal of welcome and well-wishing. The Chinese truly live by the slogan, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, and their behavior constantly reminds you of that. For the first time, I did not feel threatened by a uniformed person with a weapon. The soldiers were there to protect the people." I also want to touch on the violence that is being promoted and praised in Hong Kong, but not in BLM. There was a New York University human rights panel which was promoting the violence and the tactics as a good thing in Hong Kong and being praised all around the press as well. However, for BLM, media focused on the concern of injured officers, as you can see in the CGTN video, calling out the media's language and hypocrisy of the protesters when they used, for example, lasers. Now, the national security bill that was recently passed was incredibly important for stopping foreign influences from wreaking havoc in these protests and stopping these phony leaders from profiting from unjust rioting while manipulating the youth who are suffering under neo-colonial capitalism to turn against their Chinese brethren. I spoke more about the national security law with Hong Kong here, but I want to say something about what we're seeing in Hong Kong with US-backed protests or colored revolutions happening in the world. From Venezuela to Nicaragua, from Hong Kong to Belarus, from Bolivia to Libya, the US has backed oppositions that favor their imperialist agenda. Whether it's the balkanization strategies to break up these areas and take them one by one, lessening the influence of one country over another, oppressing socialism and communism from ever flourishing, the United States has their fingerprints all over the world to benefit itself. And they claim that they want to stop oppression while their own police force kills black people. They claim to be concerned of minorities when they put their own minorities in concentration camps, killing them with gas, torturing them for info, or sexually assaulting minors systematically for their own pleasure. If we can see what's going on and learn in Hong Kong and apply it to everywhere else, we can start to see a pattern here. This video actually makes it clear on what exactly is going on in the world.
If you want that coveted peaceful protester label that garners nonstop headlines and Western adoration, it's crucial that you protest from a country or territory that's on the US State Department's hit list. Protest against the government in Venezuela, Iran, Nicaragua, or Hong Kong, and you're guaranteed to get the hero treatment in US media, and probably even some lavish funding from USAID.
Comrades, we really need to think more critically about these protests. Mass groups of people marching on the streets demanding freedom and democracy may seem nice, but may just mean allow capitalism to run amok, while imperialists reap the rewards, exploit the people, and corrupt the system. Organizations being funded by imperialist states through Western NGOs may simply label these governments as tyrannical simply because they are against their agendas. Governments versus people may really mean government versus capitalist. We need to apply our Marxist understandings on these protests so we don't support these guys, but support actual freedom for oppressed peoples of the world.